Hello, and welcome to Chapter 12 of Loving Out Loud, Learning to Love in a Hate-Filled World's video series. This week's topic is Todd, Trash Talking Takes a Toll. I'm glad you're here, and let's just jump right in, okay? Theme scriptures for this week are from Proverbs chapter 26, verses 18 and 19. It says, like a maniac, shooting flaming arrows of death is one who deceives their neighbor and says, I was only joking. Hang on to that one. That's coming back. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. You know, I think sometimes in our modern evangelical or conservative Christian, however you want to term it, our modern way of looking at this, we think unwholesome talk is cursing, cussing. Certain words are off limits. I don't really think that's what he's talking about here. I think unwholesome talk is something a little bit different. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit more in a little bit. On to the next. Trash talking takes a toll. That was the subtitle for this chapter. A while back, I was watching some, some sports show, and it was showing replays of old NBA games. And one of the things that came up was Reggie Miller's, it was a magical game 5 against the New York Knicks. And Spike Lee, the famous director, was courtside pulling for his Knicks, but he wasn't just pulling for him. He was trash talking the entire game, ragging on the Pacers, and particularly ragging on Reggie Miller. It was quite the rivalry. If any of you were watching NBA back in those days, you know what I'm talking about. But Reggie had this one magical game. I think it was a game 5 in a series. And he just exploded and was dropping threes constantly. And at one point, he turns to Spike Lee and he gives his famous choke sign. It was Reggie taunting Spike Lee back, but it was a big trash talking back and forth trash talking session. Trash talking is really something that permeates modern sports. I think it's part of the entertainment value. But the NFL, the NFL had to get so strict on it, they had to come up with a taunting rule so that the trash talking didn't turn into actual physical fighting. As I record this, I watched a game this last weekend between the Colts and the Patriots, and we ended up with a fight in midfield between a couple of the players, because it probably started with trash talking and proceeded into something a little bit more physical. And a couple of players were tossed out of the game. It's a real thing, and sometimes it can go too far. We love it when it's our player or team doing the taunting or the trash talking and getting away with it, but we hate it when it's the opposing player and team. But I'm not, like so many other things, I'm not immune to the concept of trash talking. I tell you what, I'm never been a particularly skilled basketball player. In fact, I was so bad as a youth that I was still getting better when I turned 40 years old. But when I played a lot of basketball, one thing that I was able to do is I learned to use what I had, and what I had was some size. I was a pretty good sized guy, fairly tall and fairly stocky, and I learned to love to play defense, and so I would get down in the paint and almost dare anybody to come into the paint. I was not a particularly good scorer, but I was a pretty good fouler. I've been known to put people on the floor. And the purpose, there was a purpose behind it. I wasn't doing it just to be mean. It was to get into the other team's head. It was part of the strategy. It was to make them think twice the next time they drove the basketball into the paint. Um, and I have been known to put people on the floor. In fact, my friends created a name for it back in the day, back when I played quite a bit. Can't really do it anymore, but back in the day, if I laid one on somebody, they said, "Oh, you've been decamped." So it was kind of something that we all chuckled about, we all laughed about, and generally we left it on the court, right? We left it on the court. But trash talking is often, and ladies, I don't know if you're immune to it or not. If you're watching this and you've got some thoughts on the matter, I'd love to hear it. This isn't just a men's episode, but I know it is something that men often do. We often trash talk. Um, in fact, I was just at a friend of mine passed away recently, and I was at his funeral today. And a couple of the guys who were sharing at the funeral were talking about how basically they used to trash talk with him back and forth for years, probably decades. I think it was 30 years, 40 years, 30, 40 years of trash talking. And they both loved it. It was how they showed affection to one another. It was how basically kind of calling each other's names and putting each other down a little bit, just kind of poking fun. It was actually how that in their relationship, it's how they knew that the relationship was healthy and that they loved each other. I remember riding along on a business trip with one of my buddies at the company I worked for, and he and I would do that, and we would rip on each other, and we would go back and forth, and we were doing it one evening, and we were doing it so much that another guy that was with us thought we were about to go to blows, and we both laughed and we were like, no, we're just playing. We're just playing. It's what guys do sometimes when we play. I was thinking about, as I wrote this, I thought about Clint Eastwood in the movie Gran Torino. Um, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino is kind of a curmudgeon. He's an old retired man living in a neighborhood that's in transition. Um, there's people of a different race, people of a different culture, and people of different age that are moving in, and he doesn't like any of it, and he doesn't like those people. But eventually, he befriends them, and he particularly befriends this young man of a different race, of a different age, and of a different culture. And he decides to teach him the way that men talk to one another. So he took him to a barbershop to teach him how men talk to one another. And well, I can't repeat it because the movie uses language that I'm not going to use in this particular class, but it was a good, although peppered uh, illustration of the way that men often talk to one another. But I'm here to tell you from experience that sometimes it can go too far. I'm going to tell you about Todd. Todd and I both went to Williamstown Bible College. The picture that you see there on the screen is of a group of us that were at a reunion, probably 2012, somewhere in there. We all gathered. We were of different ages, we were of different years, but we all gathered together for this reunion in Williamstown, West Virginia. And that particular school, Williamstown Bible College, I think was founded in 1974, and it closed its doors around 1983. I was there from 1980 to 82. It was 2 full years. And Todd and I were the same age. Both had just graduated from high school. both decided to go to Williamstown Bible College, and we were starting classes just a few days later and when we met each other. And so it wasn't a very big class. There was only a handful of us coming in. It was a small school. So Todd and I became fast friends. Actually, there's three of us. It was Todd and me and Doug. And Todd and I were buddies. We became buddies right off the bat. We hung out together. We studied together. We worshiped together. And we trash talked constantly. Constantly one-upping one another, constantly ragging on one another, constantly nitpicking at one another, constantly bad-mouthing one another in fun until it wasn't fun anymore. And we didn't have a particular moment where we just got into a big argument and a fight and we split and we went in different directions. It's just we eventually migrated to other people. It was no longer fun for us to be together, and we just went separate ways because we took all the fun out of our friendship. Frankly, I've got it written down there because I don't want to forget it, but the flaming arrows of our constant trash talking murdered our friendship, but I was only joking. Kind of goes back to that scripture from Proverbs, doesn't it? I trash talked that, and I wasn't alone. Todd did it too, but we together trash talked our friendship into oblivion. Sometimes it can go too far. But what if, I want you to think about this, what if I'd encouraged Todd, at least some of the time, instead of one-upping him? What if I'd taken the time to lift him up and tell him how important he was to me, or tell him about something that really impressed me about him? What if I had taken the time to encourage him sometimes instead of the constant knocking him down? Ephesians says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of our mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. I think every one of us needs those moments in time when someone says something to build us up, to encourage us, to inspire us. And if all we get is the constant nitpicking and the constant one-upping and the constant knockdowns, eventually it becomes discouraging. Now I'm not here to say that you should never do these things, because again, with men, this is often how we show affection, but it shouldn't be the only way we show affection. So I want you to think about your closest friends, the people that mean the most to you. Are you a balm to their heart or a thorn in their foot? Give that some thought. And now we've come to our discussion questions. Have you witnessed trash talking in the sports world? Share about an experience, something you saw. And how'd you feel about it? Were you happy? Were you excited? Was it your team? Or did it really irritate you because it was the other team? This is, what kind of trash talking have you seen, and what do you think about it? Question number 2. Is trash talking in a game okay? Why or why not? What's your opinion? Again, it's just an opinion. Share it with one another. Number 3. Have you ever experienced trash talking in a friendship? Be honest about how it made you feel. How did you feel about it? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Did you like it sometimes, but then sometimes it got a little irritating? Just be open about it. Next question. Why is it so easy to trash talk and so hard to be encouraging? If you noticed a trend in these classes that the things that are negative so often that we struggle with are so much easier to do than the positive things that we should do and we could do. Okay, and at the end of this discussion question, I want you to take a few minutes to share encouraging words to one another. If you're in a group, if you're by yourself, I guess you can just share encouraging words to yourself. But hopefully you're doing this in a group and you can share it among yourselves. But take a few minutes to share encouraging words to one another in your discussion group. If you need some help, I've got some examples for you. You might use these. You might finish the sentence like this. Say, I really appreciate it when you blank, whatever it is. You have a real talent for blank. Figure out a talent they have and lift it up. It really moved me when you said, encourage them in what they're saying, what they're trying to communicate. And then one thing about you that I'd like to imitate is, all these things would be very encouraging for someone to hear. So take a few minutes and do that at this time. And when we're done with that, it's time for the challenge of the week. Here you go. Here's our weekly challenge. This week, be mindful of your words to your friends. Make a conscious effort to only say encouraging, beneficial words that will build your friends up. Let's avoid the trash talking this week. Let's purposefully build up those closest to us. All right. Next week, we're going to talk about Tom and Roland, protectors in the fray. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.